First challenge is how you can rely upon control self-assessment rather than self-audit for SOX compliance. Now, does anybody use control self-assessment for SOX compliance in your companies? Okay. How many of you also are really like SOX experts? Very knowledgeable? Okay, a few, good. Well, so we can kind of make sure everyone understands why there's an advantage to this. And my company has been doing this for several years. You know, what is the advantage? And that's what we're really going to be selling here today. What are the advantages? And the first one is, you know, you can do SOX better if you do this self-assessment process rather than what we do currently. So let's kind of talk about and set the stage what we do currently so everyone understands. I'm sure everybody understands what internal control is, right? You have internal control, and this is what management relies upon to ensure the right things get done right. And it's composed of financial controls, compliance controls, which get everything complied with, and operational controls, right? SOX came along and it said you have to build this process, right? Where you're going to have to assess internal control over financial reporting, or your financial controls that ensure the reliability of financial reporting, right? And what they did was, under AS2, they said two things. We're going to have to assess, as an external auditor, I'm going to have to assess your process for achieving, improving the effectiveness of internal control, and I'm going to have to test the controls and see if I agree. Okay? And when they did that under AS2, what that did was it caused you to create this entire layer of burden. Anybody not agree that is a layer of burden above and beyond what management uses? It doesn't generally interface with their actual internal control. It is just a layer that is necessary to achieve SOX compliance, right? So it was a very thick layer. So then they came out with AS5. And under AS5, they said, okay, well, maybe you can shorten that layer. And you can rely on entity level controls. And you can quit doing all this transaction level controls, which did, you know, decrease the layer, but it's still this huge layer of burden and cost. Now, what I want to say is you have to do this layer of cost two ways. One, your external auditor has to do it, and then you have to do something to achieve SOX compliance as a company. And what I want to say is you don't have to do this. Okay? Under AS5, this first requirement, which was wink wink, I can only, you know, feel reliable as the external auditor if you build this process that's just like my process, you know, doesn't exist anymore. Management can now build the process they want to build. Management, if they can figure out how to get back there, can go back to this process, their actual internal process for gaining assurance, okay? And if you can get there, you can integrate, embed this back into management's actual what? Process, business process, right? And that's what we're going to talk about doing, because that's what we've done. We've tried to eliminate totally this layer. And how does this layer work? It's an audit. It's normally owned by who? The internal auditors, because management doesn't want to own it, because what? It's internal audit. What do? You go out and you do this huge scoping effort, and you identify all these key controls, and then you take these key controls and you design a test case of how you're going to test it. You pull a sample, right, based on sampling selection criteria, and then you do attribute testing. All of which is what an internal auditor does and an external auditor does, but what management doesn't do, because that is not how management relies on anything when it comes to internal control, right? They don't pull, generally, you design test cases, pull samples, but all this was this framework that was developed that we're all bought into. And then what are the initiatives to improve on this existing framework currently? What are most companies doing? I just saw a seminar on SOX. They're going to improve your SOX process. They're going to do three things for you. They're going to teach you strategic scoping. And what is strategic scoping? Well, when we first came out under AS2, I remember, because I was there doing all this too, we had, let's say in our company, I don't remember, like 3,400 key controls. Because the first step is design. You have to identify all your key controls to achieve all these objectives. And we hadn't even thought we're going to have to test 3,400 controls.
Those are key controls?
Yeah, we had about 3,400 key controls. And then we occurred to us, we're going to have to test these 3,400 key controls. And it was like, oh my God, help. We can't test 3,400 key controls. This is a $5 million project. It's ridiculous, right? So from that day forward, everyone has been doing what? Strategically scoping to decrease the number of key controls. And so it went down from 3,400 in design to we're going to test 1,600 to, best in class, what is it, 300 something probably for most companies. But you still have 300 key controls that you have to go out and you have to build a test case for. You have to pull an individual sample for, and you have to design and perform an individual attribute test. That's a lot of cost, right? So we're going to eliminate almost all of that, which is almost all the cost, okay? So strategic scoping. We just keep trying to cut down the number of controls by relying on higher level controls. Second thing they're doing is automating controls. Automating controls makes a lot of sense when you have this cost, right? Test case, sample selection, attribute testing that you're going to have to do every year from now until eternity, right? That's the cost you're going to eliminate. Makes sense. Automate is make code. So strategic automation. Third, what are people trying to do? Get reliance. Let's take our junk that we got to do, and we're only doing it to get this opinion, and it's going to match what the auditor does, and let's do it for the auditor and get the auditor reliance. And the more, if we can get the auditor to rely on all 300 of these controls and they'll just come in and test, we can really reduce our audit fees, right? So that's the direction most companies are going. Anybody know that your company is going in those three directions? Right, that's where we're all going. Because we view this as cost, burden. No advantage to management because we have our process we rely on that gives us assurance, right? We have our internal control process, then we just have this burden for SOX compliance. So, first challenge, how do you merge these two? How do you get rid of these test cases, the samples, and the attribute testing, and build something that actually works for management, the management can actually rely on and get benefit from? Okay? I'm going to explain how to build a self-assessment process rather than a self-audit. Okay? So you can get that reliance. Then, we're going to leverage off of the self-assessment process in order to increase return on investment from existing infrastructure. Now, it isn't simple and it's not going to be free. To build it, you're going to have self-assessments, and although I wrote a book in 2004 about how you can do it manually, it works a whole lot better if you automate it. So you're going to have to build a system, okay? An automated system or acquire a system to automate it. So there's going to be an investment, and you're going to have an infrastructure. But the thing is, once you've already built this infrastructure,